to know each other and share and yeah, I do. I think empathy is very important.
It is. Fred Kublakowski and Alexia Russell, thank you so much for joining us on the panel, and Wallace Chapman will be back tomorrow.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei. Gloriavale's child labour, kids doing 3 a.m. starts and 12-hour plus shifts. A court rules these weren't childhood chores, and 3 men who left the community were employees from age 6 doing strenuous, difficult and sometimes dangerous work. So what happens now? Construction injuries are going through the roof, accounting for more than 500,000 days off work in 1 year. The heart of Auckland City is still beating, with more people heading back to the CBD since COVID. Rotting teeth or no teeth at all, how the pandemic has exacerbated Australia's dental divide. And a British musician shouts fans a pint at 60 pubs across the UK and Ireland to celebrate his 60th.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie. I'm Evie Ashton. 3 former members of the Gloriavale Christian community have spoken of their relief at an employment court ruling over being made to work from the age of 6. The court has ruled that they were employees from a young age until they left Gloriavale. Chief Judge Christina Ingalls found the work couldn't be considered chores and it was strenuous, difficult and sometimes dangerous. One of the men who brought the case, Hosea Courage, says workers were treated poorly at Gloriavale.
It has entirely backed up everything that we have said, that the Gloriavale was not a nice place to be. It treated its workers poorly and exploited the people in there for its personal gain.
Gloriavale's leaders say they're carefully reviewing the employment court's findings and are committed to bringing positive change to the West Coast community. The Transport Minister says Auckland's fuel tax is likely to be scrapped if a congestion charge is introduced. The government's emissions reduction plan, which is being released next week, is expected to include a proposal to charge motorists passing through busy inner-city roads at peak times. Michael Wood says the government would consider removing the fuel tax.
If we do move forward with a scheme for Auckland, we'll consider those things, but I think it's probably fairly widely accepted that it would be a significant impost to have both of those schemes in place at the same time, so we would certainly take that into consideration.
Michael Wood says a congestion charge will also need to be equitable for people on lower incomes. Tradies and employers are being urged to take the risk of injury seriously, with new data showing more than 100 ACC claims are filed each day. There were almost 40,000 ACC claims for construction site injuries in the past financial year, the highest tally in a decade. ACC's working with the charitable trust Construction Health and Safety to try to lower the rate of worksite injuries. Master Builders Chief Executive David Kelly says the industry is already under pressure from supply chain problems and worker shortages.
So all the more reason that we should focus on the things that we can improve. And if we've got a shortage of people with skills, the last thing we want is for those people to need further time off work.
David Kelly says it makes economic sense for employers to look after their staff. The number of COVID cases in New Zealand since the pandemic began has gone past 1 million. This time last year, the total was 2,228. Leah Tibbett reports.
9,173 cases have been reported today, and 14 more people have died with the virus. The Ministry of Health says 6 of them were in their 70s, 3 in their 80s, and 5 over 90. 5 were men and 9 women. The total death toll from the pandemic is now 876. The rolling average of daily deaths remains 14, while the rolling average of cases, 7,927, is just 16 fewer than it was a week ago.
And inner-city Auckland businesses that suffered under the Delta lockdown are happy to see a rise in foot traffic. The group Heart of the City says the CBD is beginning to recover, with 132,000 people out and about last Friday, the busiest end to the working week since last year's lockdown. Assistant manager at our Mano restaurant, Richie Adams, says the buzz is back.
It's all on, really. Once we make the switch to orange light, everybody's back in the offices, and we actually don't even have the staff to fill this place to capacity.
But Heart of the City says spending is still down by nearly 40% on pre-pandemic levels. You can hear more on this story soon on Checkpoint. To sport, and Black Caps batsman Henry Nicholls is in doubt for the side's upcoming tour of England after suffering an injury. Nicholls has strained his calf at the squad's pre-departure training camp in Mount Maunganui. He's having an MRI scan, and coach Gary Stead says they should know in the next 24 to 48 hours as to whether Nicholls will be able to fly out with the squad to England this weekend. The first test starts at Lord's on June 2nd. The Black Sticks striker Olivia Merry is all for the side's co-captaincy setup as they head into a busy couple of months, starting with the Trans-Tasman series in Auckland tonight. It'll be the New Zealand side's first matches since the Tokyo Olympics, and after a number of retirements, it's been decided that Merry will share the captaincy duties with defender Megan Hull.
Co-captaincy is fantastic for this group, and I think it means that we're a bit more diverse across this group as opposed to what maybe our leadership groups have been in the past.
The Black Sticks have the World Cup and Commonwealth Games on the horizon. Moana Pacifica's COVID-postponed Super Rugby Pacific match against the Western Force has been rescheduled for 2 weeks from today at Mount Smart Stadium. And defending champion Phil Mickelson and 15-time golf major winner Tiger Woods have both been named in the 156-strong field for next week's US PGA Championship in Oklahoma. New Zealand's Ryan Fox will also play in the tournament. That's the news.
More government involvement in supermarkets.
The Minister can't ignore what the public are telling us, which is that they want something done about the state of competition in our supermarket sector.
More support for apprenticeships.
This program has really turbocharged those numbers and gotten more people into apprenticeships at a time which has been really uncertain to business.
And half price on public transport.
Lower income and middle income are being squeezed really tightly, and one way you can save money is actually catching a bus or train or ferry to work.
Value for money. Morning report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel. Fine spells, a few showers, clearing tonight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers easing tomorrow. From Waitomo to Kapiti Coast, also Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Mainly fine, apart from isolated showers until this evening. Wellington and Wairarapa, occasional showers, clearing tomorrow afternoon. Looking at Te Waipounamu, Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mostly fine. However, there are isolated showers about northern Bulla and Nelson and far south of Fiordland. Marlborough and Canterbury, areas of cloud, a few showers today, clouds clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. Otago and Southland, areas of cloud and some showers, fine tomorrow. And Rekohu, the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few light showers. It's 6 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Employment Court has ruled that 3 members of the reclusive Gloriavale Christian community were employees, working long hours from the age of just 6. The landmark decision about the strenuous, difficult and sometimes dangerous work done by children is likely to have significant legal ramifications for the community on the South Island's west coast. Jean Edwards and cameraman Nate McKinnon spoke to 2 of the young men who brought the case.
Daniel Pilgrim was born into the Gloriavale community and put to work at the age of 6, first in the gardens, then the moss factory and one of its dairy farms. He says the court's decision is mind-blowing.
Voices in there that have been silenced for so many years, their voices are finally being heard, and there's some legal recognition and something's happening. You know, it's amazing, really.
Daniel Pilgrim, Hosea Courage and Levi Courage went to court in February, seeking a declaration they were employees, not volunteers. The court has found all 3 were employees from the age of 6 until they left Gloriavale. Chief Judge Christina Inglis found the work couldn't be considered chores because of the commercial nature of the tasks. They were done over an extended period of time and they were strenuous, difficult and sometimes dangerous. Hosea Courage says he feels vindicated.
It has entirely backed up everything that we have said, that the Gloriavale was not a nice place to be. It treated its workers poorly and exploited the people in there for its personal gain.
The judge has reserved a decision on the costs the men are entitled to. The Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust manager, Liz Gregory, is delighted the members' employment status has been legally recognised.
I think the impact of this on people's lives in Gloriavale is not to be underestimated. We're talking about the babies whose mums can't look after them because they work. We're talking about children who've been working from a young age, whose childhoods have been stolen from them.
Last year, the Labour Inspectorate found members of Gloriavale couldn't legally be considered employees, so alleged employment law breaches fell outside its jurisdiction to investigate. Daniel Pilgrim says it hasn't done its job.
They're hopeless, really. I mean, I understand that it was going to be messy for them to step in and get involved, and I believe that's why they didn't. It was just a bit of a cop-out, really. So hopefully now they will actually start doing their job.
While it's an unusual case, Liz Gregory says the employment court ruling is embarrassing for the Inspectorate.
They had credible and really good information in front of them, and they just didn't pick up on the alarm bells that people have been ringing for years.
Judge Inglis says loud alarm bells should also have been ringing from even a cursory read of a Gloriavale document called What We Believe, which makes it clear the leadership group holds absolute power and control and that members must not report concerns to external agencies. Hosea Courage is worried about the people who still live and work at Gloriavale.
I feel it might not be able to be, the exploitation there may not be able to be stopped unless it is closed down.
Yeah.
Gloriavale's leaders say they are carefully reviewing the employment court's findings and are committed to bringing positive change to the community.
Brian Henry represented the 3 Gloriavale leavers in this employment court case and joins us now. Kia ora, Brian. How significant is this ruling?
Well, for Gloriavale, very significant because it goes to the heart of their business model and it also goes to the heart of how they've financially structured these businesses.
Tell us more about that.
Well, basically, their businesses, and the judge has said this, are built on a model where they work in businesses from a young age. They're not paid and they don't have any of the standard terms of conditions of employees that apply to everybody else in New Zealand. So things like tea breaks, 8-hour days, weekends, standard things that we assume everybody has.
So, in simple terms, Brian, their commercial success is built on the backs of child labour.
It's child labour and free labour, and labour that has worked way beyond what any competitor can do. And the judge actually notes that one of the factors is they're in competition, and it's not fair competition, so that's a factor she could take into account to say they're employees.
So is that slave labour, Brian?
She talks about slave labour, but she's left that for other agencies to deal with.
Given what the Chief Judge has said about the fact that this business model relies on child labour, you've pointed out that they don't have any of the rights and privileges of employees. Should people be buying these products?
Well, I'll leave that to people's good taste, but I'm not going to venture a view one way or the other, but I know how I feel about this organisation.
Brian, would you buy those products?
Of course not.
Okay. So what happens now in terms of whether they're entitled to any compensation for wages that they didn't get?
Okay, the Labour Inspectorate has a duty, if they're employees, to make inquiries and do the recoveries for them, not just for them, but also any other children who are inside Gloriavale on similar facts to these 3 plaintiffs. Remember, these 3 plaintiffs work in industry. There are women teams who don't, and their trial starts on the 31st of August.
To be clear, can you just give us a bit of an overview of what sort of work these kids were doing?
They were working in moss factories from 6 years old, which is harvesting sphagnum moss from swamps and putting them into shakers and drying them. They were working inside the bee industry, making honey, looking after bees, doing the woodwork around bees. Industries where there was a terrible injury record and rate, and some of them were seriously injured, but not my particular plaintiffs.
What about further action in terms of things like these kids were supposed to be at school, so they were working during the hours that they were supposed to be attending school?
Okay. What this was a preliminary question as to whether or not they're employees. There is a whole range of litigation that carries on now that question's answered. So to watch this space.
Yeah, so it's a multi-stage thing, because the question is, who was their employer as well?
Yeah, that's a question left open. I don't think it's a hard one to answer given the terms of the judgment. But having said that, their structure, as Her Honour said, is very complex, it's very vague and waffly. And to be quite honest, the overseeing shepherd can change it whenever he wants, according to the documents.
What do you think this has offered in terms of an insight into how this organisation operates beyond the three people that you represented?
You see the way these three have been looked after. You see evidence of one of them being beaten by a shovel till he's black and blue and he couldn't walk for 3 days. They may have changed some of these things, but the practice of them all working all the time, that hasn't changed. Working long hours, that hasn't changed. Not getting the basic human right conditions of employment in New Zealand, that hasn't changed.
Have government agencies done right by these leavers and other children inside this community?
The only government agency I'll excuse are the police. They have been busy working trying to deal with the sexual side of this community and the misbehaviour there, but if you read the judgment, it spells out they're anti-cooperating with authorities, anti-cooperating with police. Other government agencies should have seen and not had the wool pulled over their eyes, but it happened.
Who do you mean, Brian? Who's let them down?
Well, when you start looking at the welfare of children, you can start ticking off a number of government agencies. We, of course, have sued the Labour Inspectorate, and they are a party to the proceedings as the first defendant, so quite clearly I've got them in my sights.
Thanks for your time this evening, Brian. That is Brian Henry, who represented the three leavers in that employment court case. And the court has ruled that they were employed from the age of 6, sometimes doing gruelling and dangerous work. It is 5:15. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. In the middle of a housing crisis, avoidable construction injuries are stopping about 340 more homes being built each year. The stats are through the roof. 2 million more metres of scaffolding could have been put up and 1 million more metres of roofing laid, but for the injuries. That's according to ACC and the charitable trust Construction Health and Safety, who say construction industry mishaps have been on the rise, with more than 100 happening each day. They're pouring $3.9 million into a program to try and change that track record. Katie Todd has the details.
Ben Clisby, his 3 half-brothers and his father are all roofers in the lower North Island. The family know a thing or two about flashings and underlay, but they also know all about making an ACC claim.
I think all of us have had cartilage cut out of our knees, including my father. Some of my brothers and my dad have had the surgery twice on different knees, a lot of lacerations, and we've all suffered from back pains and neck pains, joint pains over the years.
And their injuries are just a drop in the proverbial bucket. ACC data reveals there were almost 40,000 claims related to construction site injuries in the last financial year, ending mid-2021. It's the highest rate of injuries in 10 years, equivalent to more than 100 a day. ACC says the number of soft tissue injuries, most commonly strains and sprains, topped 91,000 between 2017 and 2021. Its injury prevention program leader James Whittaker describes those as pretty sad stats.
There's a higher risk of injury in the construction sector than most other New Zealand industries. Roughly about 10% of the New Zealanders who are injured at work are working in the construction sector.
That comes with costly consequences, almost $400 million in payouts and more than 500,000 days off work in 5 years. 64-year-old plumber Rapuriri took time off in 2020 after injuring his knee while lifting a tank, but says it's continued to impact his ability to work, even now he's back on the tools.
So I can't crawl under houses. It's hard for me to climb up ladders. Yeah, it's difficult. So at least for me, at my age, it's been a struggle. But I've seen fellas a lot younger struggle with very similar things.
So what can be done to cut down the number of construction injuries? Rapuriri believes it's time to tackle the industry's macho attitude.
Caring more for each other and not being afraid to speak out. Have the courage and the mana, so to speak, just to express how you feel and protect yourself and other people.
James Whittaker agrees the vast majority of injuries are avoidable. He believes tradies can learn from the most commonly reported injuries and not make the same mistake. ACC has launched a program with Construction Health and Safety called Work Should Not Hurt, which offers employers resources, tips, site visits and workshops to help keep their employees safe.
This is all about flipping it around, so instead of relying on hindsight, we can actually have foresight instead.
It comes at a time when the industry is already under immense pressure from supply chain issues and worker shortages. Master Builders Chief Executive David Kelly says it makes economic sense for business owners to do the right thing and keep their employees safe on the job.
So all the more reason that we should focus on the things that we can improve. And again, I guess if we've got a shortage of people with skills, the last thing we want is for those people to need further time off work.
James Whittaker says he'll know the program is working when claims go down and there's more happy people at work sites around the country.
And joining us now is Construction Health and Safety New Zealand's Program Manager, Chris Polichuk. Hi, Chris.
Good, Lisa.
Why is it so bad?
Well, Lisa, there's a lot of work out there for their tradies at the moment. They're building our housing stocks, a lot of people to house. It's a perfect storm, really. Not only can't we get hold of good tradies at the moment, and we've got a lot of new tradies coming on, but there is a shortage of supplies. There's a lot of stress around at the moment as well, and it's a perfect storm for injuries.
So, Chris, are you saying the pressure is on them and perhaps some corners are being cut?
I think so. At times, time frames have been squashed and go out of joint. So I think, the temptation is to cut corners and just work through it.
Who's doing that? Who's putting the pressure on? Is it individuals feeling the pressure, or are some companies putting pressure on workers?
Well, I think all tradies are proud of their jobs and proud of their work, and they just want to provide a good service. So I guess that the pressure's on themselves, really.
The trend in this industry is what? Because it doesn't look like your friend on the surface.
Yeah, the trend is that they're increasing, unfortunately, these problems and musculoskeletal problems especially. And, with the record numbers of apprentices coming in, we've got to be a little bit more mindful of them now so we don't, lead these people down the same path.
How many deaths have there been in this industry in the last few years?
Deaths?
Yeah.
Far too many, to tell you the truth. Our program's not aiming to prevent any deaths in particular, but far too many deaths in construction in New Zealand.
I saw on your website 37 deaths on site in 5 years. That seems exceptionally high.
It is exceptionally high, and it's a real black mark on our industry, and it's something that we're addressing.
So this campaign, how do you reckon it is going to change things? Because I'm just wondering if the messages that you're putting out there are ones that these people know already and are just ignoring.
They could be. We've got a real simple message for tradies. 3 things they can do automatically. 1, be aware of the work that they do below their knees at ground level and try to get their work up off the ground where possible. 2, reduce the amount of time they spend with their arms over their heads and working overhead. And 3, just find better ways to move heavy things and objects.
And what kind of feedback do you get from people on the job about this?
People really love real practical tips that they can implement, like these 3 steps that I've told you about. So tradies, being practical people, good with their hands, they're really loving this program because it has presents real simple ideas for seemingly complex problems.
So, Chris, have you done any calculations? Those 3 things that you just outlined to me seem so incredibly simple. Do you have any calculations about how many injuries you think you could avoid if people followed those 3 steps?
No calculations on injuries at the moment, but I think we can save a lot of pain and we can increase productivity, save a lot of time, and also help keep some of these tradies in careers for longer.
Thank you for joining us. That is Chris Polachuk, who is, he's the Program Manager for Construction Health and Safety New Zealand and trying to bring down those bad stats for injuries on construction sites. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Let us know your thoughts on Gloriavale. 3 people who have left that community have been ruled to be employees by the Employment Court working for that organisation since age 6. Let us know your thoughts on that. And also, if you're on a construction site, are you getting the hurry along from your company? Are corners being cut in terms of safety? Do let us know. Text me, Pātui Mai 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or you can send us an email, checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. Auckland residents are wary about the prospect of a congestion charge, saying it will add to the steep cost of living and discourage some from visiting the struggling city centre. Drivers could soon be paying as much as $7 a day to arrive and leave the city during peak hours. Amy Williams reports.
Once dubbed the city of snails for its traffic congestion, Auckland is still looking for a solution. Congestion charging is seen as a way to combat vehicle emissions by taking an estimated 12% of traffic off the city's clogged roads. While such a charge has the backing of most political parties, there's concern it unfairly affects those on lower incomes who have no choice but to drive. Auckland resident Jenny Preston says she hails Ubers and wouldn't want to pay a congestion surcharge.
Absolutely not with the petrol prices as well. I don't believe that Auckland City is as busy as it used to be anyway, because people are working all over Auckland. But yeah, I don't think we're ready for that, not right now.
Fellow resident Murray Tonkin says the city isn't big enough to benefit from a congestion charge, and it might discourage people from visiting the central business district.
I'm not sure that Auckland is big enough for something like that. I mean, I've been to Singapore, I've been to London where they got congestion charges, and it's probably for a city that's very compact and got a lot of people. I'm not sure it's appropriate for here.
The number of people taking public transport is still well below pre-COVID levels, but tipped over 1 million passengers last week for the first time since last August, when Auckland went into its latest lockdown. Another resident says such a charge would encourage him onto public transport more often.
Would you pay $3.50 for 2 hours in the city?
Probably not, probably just bus. But it's very rare that I drive in when I actually have to. Most of the time I do, and I just drive in because I can. It's easier.
Do you think Auckland's ready for a congestion charge?
Yeah, probably.
A 2020 report called The Congestion Question recommended charging $3.50 for peak periods, with the charges only applied once within a 2-hour window, regardless of distance travelled. It suggested starting with a city centre charge and expanding to other areas over time. The urban advocacy group Greater Auckland broadly supports congestion pricing because it's designed to change when or how people travel into congested areas. Its spokesperson Matt Lowry says the first stage would likely focus on the city centre, which has good public transport options.
We're probably not looking at this till 2025 at the very earliest. And by the time that comes in, we'll also have the City Rail Link, we'll have other big infrastructure projects that will help improve the options that people have for getting around Auckland.
He says the biggest challenge will be to keep it fair for people who can't afford the charge but have to drive. The details yet to come.
All that work needs to be done around actually how do you make sure it is equitable, what happens with the money that gets raised. All those things are to be worked out.
Transport Minister Michael Wood says he'd like to see a strong focus on equity for any congestion charge.
I think it's important that if we make this change, that we would do so in a way that makes people better off, not worse off. We have to bear in mind that the current transport system has many inequities built into it for low-income New Zealanders as well.
National Party leader Chris Luxon says any congestion charge can't be a tax grab, and he'd want to see the fuel tax removed. More detail is expected to be released on Monday, but the first step in any congestion charge will be putting in place the legislation to design the scheme.
Meanwhile, the buzz is coming back to Auckland CBD after COVID-19 lockdowns, and time in red cost businesses an estimated $1.2 billion. Heart of the City figures released to Checkpoint show spending is up, but there's a difficult road ahead, made harder by staff shortages hitting hospitality. Some business owners told our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Munro it will take years for them to recover.
Last time we visited Bobby Liu, he cut a lonely, dejected figure, sitting solitary in his high street cafe. He was waiting for someone, anyone, to come by for a coffee, desperate for his fortunes to change as Auckland crawled through lockdown week 9.
It looks like a never ending. It's been going on for 2.5 months. We are still here.
But today, 7 months on, out of lockdown, Bobby manages a smile. A semblance of normality is back at his cafe, The Shelf.
It's much better now than, obviously, than lockdown last year. More people back to the city, more office workers back to office, and universities are open, so more students are back.
But make no mistake, his business's bruises are severe. They run deep and are still healing.
Who knows, maybe a couple of years, maybe it will never be the same again, you know.
But Bobby acknowledges things are certainly better. After all, nothing compares to a lockdown, he says.
It's been tough, been terrible, you know. Yeah, it can't get anything worse than that.
Indeed, new numbers from Heart of the City do show a semblance of CBD recovery. Downtown Auckland's just had its busiest Friday and Saturday since last August's mammoth lockdown, with more than 132,000 people out and about in the city on Friday and 124,000 on Saturday. But not so fast. Spending is still down nearly 40% on 2019 figures and around 45% on 2019 foot traffic. Heart of the City now estimates a loss of consumer spending in central Auckland of more than $1.2 billion. Despite that, further down High Street, Chuffed manager Mike Chudder concedes he is, well, chuffed to see the slow return of the long-lost lunchtime rush.
All the businesses are coming back, you know, all the coffee flow. Like this morning, if you were here 15 minutes ago, we were full house. So that's just amazing to see how things are working out.
But on the horizon sits a new challenge, one every business we speak to is starting to grapple with. An outflux of overseas workers, coupled with Kiwis quitting the country, and Mr. Chudder says the barista shortage is biting.
It has been very hard to find people. Like, I'm still struggling. Needed a barista, took me like a month or two to do that. Still looking for more shifts, which is going to be really hard, especially that we're getting busy now than we need most. Otherwise, the people I've got, they're like exhausted already, and I don't feel good for them, you know, like working every day or like continuing so many hours. So it has been very tough.
So we shoot down to Imano, where assistant venue manager Richie Adams says he's battling staff shortages too.
We're limiting seating in the restaurant just so that we can still keep a good quality standard of service for people because, yeah, the CVs aren't coming in like they used to. But hopefully that changes, you know, with people coming in on working holidays and different tourists coming through, you know. Hopefully we'll find some people.
But like his Central City colleagues, Mr. Adams' message is one of relief that things are bouncing back and determination to make up for lost time.
It's all on, really. Once we make the switch to orange light, everybody's back in the offices and, yeah, I mean, we actually don't even have the staff to fill this place to capacity.
Meanwhile, Heart of the City Chief Executive and mayoral candidate Viv Beck says there's something missing before the city really starts swinging. She's got visions of cruise ships once again sailing in the Waitemata.
Some of the lines are being cancelled because we haven't got confirmation of an opening date. So I understand it's imminent, but it really needs to be imminent. To some people it's probably different from others, but we mean, and I know the cruise industry is expecting it yesterday.
But a semblance of normality is returning for the city's retailers, cafes and restaurants. Just a few more ingredients needed for the finished product.
And if you're listening to that on radio, do check out the video version of that story from our two Nicks. We'll put it on our website. Kia ora e te iwi e haere ake nei e a checkpoint. More on the employment court ruling that details child labour at the Gloriavale Christian community. National's Dr Shane Reti suffers an apparent bout of political foot and mouth and an absolute pile of pints at 60 pubs for his 60th birthday celebration. You'll want to hear that one. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
The leaders of the Gloriavale Christian community on the West Coast are reviewing an employment court's findings that members are employees and not volunteers. 3 former members who worked at the commune from the age of 6 took the case to court. A judgment has found that the work they carried out could not just be classified as chores because it was strenuous, difficult and sometimes dangerous. The commune's leaders say they're committed to bringing positive change to the community. New data shows that almost 40,000 ACC claims were made for construction site injuries in the past financial year, the highest tally in a decade. ACC is working with the charitable trust Construction Health and Safety to try to lower the rate of worksite injuries. Master Builders Chief Executive David Kelly says the industry is already under pressure from supply chain problems and worker shortages, but he says it's important to focus on the things that can be improved. Mr Kelly says it makes economic sense for employers to look after their staff. New Zealand's share market has taken another pounding. It's trading at a near 2-year low after suffering heavy losses for a third consecutive day. The benchmark NZX 50 index has closed down 152 points, or 1.3% to its lowest level since July 2020. The volatility is being blamed on rising interest rates, China's COVID disruptions, and the Ukraine war. Influenza cases are rising in the Lower South Island, with more people turning up at emergency departments with the virus. The Medical Officer of Health, Dr Susan Jack, says anyone who's eligible for a free flu vaccination should get it now to reduce the risk of severe flu symptoms. And fewer tickets will be available for Hawke's Bay's Art Deco festivities in the future due to a lack of international tourists. Last year's festival was cancelled and this year's was scaled back. Those are the headlines. Our next full bulletin is at 6.
E hoa no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier, who is here to talk business in the studio. Consumers, they're spending more, Nona, so they're back at it. What are they buying?
Well, they're spending more because the prices have gone up. Okay. I'll just have to start by saying that. But not only, they're spending things like they're buying food.
Yeah, of course.
Groceries is another. Drinks, and an increase also in clothing and footwear. So I guess some of that was deferred spending, nowhere to go. So why bother getting all dressed up?
Yeah, weren't leaving the house. So
exactly,
no
exactly. And fuel spending was up 3%. So yeah, prices are up. And so is the spending that goes along with that. Those were the numbers, up 7% on the year. On the month before.
It's kind of interesting because everything you've outlined there is sort of essential items, really.
People aren't. Yeah, but you know what? It turns out people are spending a little bit less on going out.
Right.
So that's not a surprise. Although that coincided with the numbers coincide with the red to orange. So there's a transition there. I think that's probably improved according to the latest item we saw.
Gotcha, yeah. Okay, employees' expectations have changed as they return to the office. Okay, what's on their wish list? What are they expecting?
Well, you would not be surprised to hear a good cup of coffee is one. A company that can provide a good cup of coffee, warm and hot drinks on demand, clean premises is another one, and flexibility, an water cooler, that kind of thing, standing around chatting with a lot of flexibility, a nice collegial environment. But also people are really concerned. About 4 out of 5 people who look for a job are worried about and concerned about the culture of the organization. What are their ethics? And you're looking at me.
Well, I'm still back with the coffee, Nona. Did people actually list coffee, good coffee,
a good cup of coffee
in their workplace? They actually listed that as one of their top priorities in returning to the office.
They wanted They wanted top-notch technology, ergonomic workstations, a quiet space to contemplate. And what they really missed about not being at work was meeting up with their workmates, sparking up ideas, that kind of thing. So, and also I guess the difference between work and home, it's very hard that blurs when you're working from home. It was quite nice that they thought that work was work and home was home. So a lot of people like that as well about going back to the office. So yeah, high expectations amongst them. A good cup of coffee. Just keep that in mind.
Okay, text us 2101. What are your expectations if you're returning to the office? What do you want more than you've had in the past? We're really interested to know. Nona, shall we do a spin around the markets then?
I think we should. Okay, so the market had a pretty rough day. At one point, the top 50 index was down 2%. It recovered to finish down just 1 1/3%, which is an improvement. 150-point drop to 11,229. But, when you look at what's going on in Asia, Singapore, and so forth, it's not really out of line. It's, the losses, I think in Singapore, for example, Asian shares fell to their lowest level in 2 years. So I don't think we're in good or bad company, as you would want to put it.
Got the dollar?
Yeah, I do. The dollar also was sent lower than 63 U.S. cents in early trading, but it recovered to finish up at 63.3 U.S. cents and just a touch weaker against the Australian at 90.9 Australian and 51.2 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with Business News. It's a hit and run of a different kind. A number of T3 lane cameras on Auckland's Oniwa Road have been smashed, and the vandals may have been caught in the act. Only vehicles with 3 or more people can use the lanes at rush hour. If the cameras catch you breaking the rules, you're fined. North Shore residents are fed up with the cameras after 68 of them were installed along the busy road. In some cases, they say the posts for the cameras have been planted right in the middle of the footpath, which locals say is a hazard for pedestrians. Kaiapā Tiki Local Board Chair John Gillen joins me now. Hi John, is this a random act of vandalism, or do they not like the idea of being policed with these cameras, do you think?
Good evening, Lisa. I'm not sure at this stage. It could be either, but I do know that, as you say, residents are fed up with these cameras and tempers are running pretty high.
So have they got a point in terms of the positioning of them?
So what do you mean, the positioning of them?
Well, they're complaining. They're saying that some of the posts are in the middle of the footpath. Are they right? Are they a hazard for pedestrians?
Yes, absolutely. So the Kaipari Local Board did complain about it, and in response, Auckland Transport have built out the footpaths around them. But so you'll still need to walk around them, but at least there's space to do that now.
That doesn't sound like great planning.
No, it doesn't. And I think that one of the main issues with this whole project has been that we didn't know it was happening. The Kaipari Local Board was blindsided that this was happening. There was no consultation with the public. They just went ahead and did it. And they didn't position them well. And now they're having to make changes to it to try to improve the safety.
So while I'm sure you don't endorse behaviour of this kind, do you have some sympathy?
Yes, I don't endorse the actions at all, but I can understand where the public are coming from if it is intentional and not just a random act of violence.
So how much are these cameras worth, do you know?
It was $2.6 million to install the cameras. That's not including any work they've done since then to improve the safety, but it was $2.6 million.
So it sounds like it's potentially a pretty expensive ergonomic mistake.
Yes, it is. Well, it's an expensive project overall, especially when we already had 99% compliance with the T3 lane.
So is it worth it then, or is it just revenue gathering?
Well, we don't know yet if it's revenue gathering because, as of December anyway, Auckland Transport didn't have any projections of how much income they're going to be making from the cameras, but we can only assume that they will be making some sort of money from it. I hope they'll be getting back they'll be getting back the $2.6 million, but it'll be coming out of the pockets of my residents, so that's not great.
Why does the road need 68 cameras? That sounds like a hell of a lot.
Yeah, it's 68 cameras in 17 locations. So Auckland Transport have divided the road up into 17 areas, and each one has its own camera. So that's 8 going up the hill and 9 going down the hill. And each pole has 4 cameras, one that monitors the road, one that monitors the transit lane sign, one that looks at the front of your car, gets your number plate and counts how many people are in the front seat, and one that looks at the side of the car and they're able to see into the back seat. And that way they're able to determine whether you do have 3 or more people in the car.
But didn't you just tell me that there's 99% compliance?
That's what Auckland Transport have told us, yes.
So does that not seem like overkill?
Yes, it does, absolutely. It's absolutely overkill.
In terms of the what it's trying to achieve, obviously they only want people with 3 passengers driving in that particular lane. Why don't people just pick up a couple of randoms from the bus stop so that they can use it?
Well, they have done that in the past, but it does become difficult, and of course you've then got to find somewhere where you can stop and actually pick up those people without holding up the traffic. Look, there's the issues with this lane is the people living on the road or coming out of the side roads find it very difficult to move from the T3 lane across that, when you've got buses shooting down the hill, across that and into the general lane. So they actually end up having to pull out into the transit lane, stop and wait till they get into the general lane. Of course, that holds up the buses as well. It's just very ill thought out. I mean, when there were cameramen at the top and the bottom of the road, people could see where they were and they could act accordingly. But when you've got almost guaranteed that you're going to be caught out, even unintentionally, when you're actually trying to obey the rules, with so many cameras there, then this is going to cause problems. The cameras went live on the 26th of April, but they're just issuing warnings at the moment. Their tickets will be starting from Tuesday the 24th of May, and those infringement notices will be $150 a pop. So people are going to be caught out, and I can understand why people are getting angry.
Appreciate your time, John. That's John Gillen there on those cameras, the T3 lane cameras on Oniwa Road. Let us know your thoughts on that one. Text us on 2101. National MP Dr Shane Reti is under fire for comments he made comparing Māori life expectancy to the 1840s. The opposition's health spokesman told the Hui health outcomes for Māori have improved because life expectancy has lifted since 1840. As Ashley McCall reports, other Māori leaders have slammed his comparison as nonsense.
Dr Shane Reti not backing down after comparing Māori life expectancy to the 1840s. The National Health spokesperson defended his claim, saying he was trying to argue how the lifespan of Māori has increased over time.
Clearly there has been improvements, and I think we need to be careful that we don't diminish the work of many good people who have brought it to this point in time anyway. But the most important point is what we have today, how we explain those 7 years difference in life expectancy and across a range of other metrics.
That 7-year difference he's referring to is the age gap, where Māori men are likely to die earlier than their Pākehā counterparts. The gap has widened even further for those Māori living with assistance. Te Kōhao Health Managing Director Lady Tureti Moxon, who is on the incoming Māori Health Authority Board, says Dr Reti's comparison is damaging because it doesn't factor in other inequalities.
The issue that I have with making things so simplistic is that times have drastically changed even now, and we have a huge gap between those who have access to good health and those who do not. And the other thing we have a big issue with in our country is that we have a lot more people who are Māori and who are living on the poverty line.
National has committed to scrapping the new Māori Health Authority if they win next year's election. Dr Shane Reti believes the Māori Health Authority is the wrong approach to addressing poor health outcomes. He instead wants a Māori Health Directorate within the ministry. In defending his comparison to 182 years ago, he says it acknowledges gains made but shows there is still work to do.
It's an argument for respecting the work that's been done that brings us through to this point, but then also focuses on the inequalities we have here today. That's the challenge we need to focus on today. It's a response to the argument that there have been no health gains for Māori over decades, saying that's not possible. Look at life expectancy.
Māori Development Minister Willie Jackson has branded Dr Reti's comments as ridiculous.
He knows, having been involved in his local community in terms of health, that Māori health has been at a catastrophic level and that there needs to be a special strategy around Māori health. And we've tried everything. They have not appropriated enough resourcing for that kaupapa. And we're looking to obviously appropriate major funding towards it, but also give Māori the opportunity to lead it. So I just think I think Shane's talking nonsense.
The Māori Health Authority will be in place by July and will set policies for Māori health and decide funding for services. Lady Tureti Moxon believes it can't come quick enough.
dying 7 years younger is still not good enough for our country and those of us within our society. We should all have equity in terms of access, in terms of being diagnosed in a timely manner, being given the kinds of operations and interventions that are required when required, and we're still not getting that.
And with many Māori and non-Māori back in the authorities' establishment, it's hoped this will be a leap, not a shuffle.
A lot of you getting in touch about our earlier interview on injuries on construction sites and the trend, well, upwards, and there's been a number of deaths in the past 5 years, and a new campaign to try and curb the number of injuries. Forget Bob the Builder, we've got Steve the Builder's reckons here. Steve says too many soft, doughy humans trying to be tradies, hungover, overweight, unfit, eating crap for lunch. Do some exercise, says Steve. Eat some vegetables and drink some water. Cheers. Sorry for the rant. Steve, builder of 25 years, still pumping. No ACC claims. Thanks for clarifying that, Steve. Another bit of advice on improvements to building site safety. This listener says the act of treating the apprentice as a dog's body to do all the crap jobs could cease. Lose the macho behaviour and work as a team to achieve a goal with respect for each other. Have a limit of time a person can work strenuous jobs. Share barrowing concrete, for example, instead of watching and laughing at the newbie doing it all. Keep your texts coming, 2101, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The Queen has pulled out of attending this year's state opening of Parliament in the UK for the first time since 1963. In a statement, Buckingham Palace says the monarch has reluctantly decided not to attend after consultation with her doctors. The BBC's Nicholas Witchell reports.
It is the most important constitutional duty she performs as monarch, opening a new session of Parliament. The Queen has only been absent from the state opening on 2 occasions in the early part of her reign when she was pregnant. But tonight, the palace confirmed that she would not be there tomorrow. In a statement, the palace said, the Queen continues to experience episodic mobility problems and in consultation with her doctors has reluctantly decided that she will not attend the state opening of Parliament tomorrow. Most unusually, the Regency Act of 1937 has been invoked to empower the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Cambridge as councillors of state to represent the Queen. The Prince of Wales will read the Queen's speech, written, of course, by the Governor.
Good morning, Your Majesty. How are you?
Well, as you can see, I can't move.
That the Queen has had difficulties walking has been evident for some months now. She's been seen several times using a stick. This was Sandringham in February. But quite what the palace means by its phrase, episodic mobility problems, is unclear. Officials will not define what those problems are, other than to say that they are a continuation of the issues she's encountered since last autumn. That there has been a change in her general health is apparent. It began last October. On the evening of the 19th of October, the Queen was at a reception at Windsor Castle. The following day, she cancelled a trip to Northern Ireland and was taken by road into hospital in London, where she spent one night. No reason has ever been given. So, should we be concerned?
I know several people who've seen her recently, and apparently she's on very good form. But listen, she's 96 years old. She's been through an awful lot of difficulties recently, not least the death of her husband last year.
The Queen wearing a She's been at the centre of the nation's affairs for more than 70 years. Tomorrow, the Queen will be absent from the state opening due to reasons of health. But palace sources say she's looking forward to her Platinum Jubilee and hopes to take part in as much of it as possible.
The pandemic has exacerbated the long-running dental divide between rich and poor in Australia. A quarter of over 75s have teeth affected by decay, while 1/5 of them have no teeth at all. As the ABC's Stephanie Dalzell reports, pressure is building on the major political parties to do more to tackle poor oral health, especially of those in aged care.
As the bones in 69-year-old Barbara's jaw started to disintegrate, her teeth began to fall out.
There's a lot of factors that contributed to that, but at the end of the day, I did need to have all my teeth replaced or dentures. That was my only option.
The public servant from Parkes in New South Wales immediately went to a specialist dentist and was told she'd need teeth extractions and a full set of oral implants. The out-of-pocket costs were almost $70,000.
I knew that, okay, we're in this for the long haul. So I just had to deal with it. End of story. There was a lot of other options. But I did say to them, what do people do? There's so many people in Australia can't afford to do that.
Those Australians who can't afford oral care have few options. Some spend years on lists for public dental clinics, which are run by the states with help from the Commonwealth. And the Australian Dental Association Vice President, Dr Stephen Liu, says nowhere is the huge gap in care more apparent than among older Australians, particularly those in aged care.
We have stories of patients in aged care facilities with almost no teeth left, with abscesses, pus, bleeding and discomfort to a level where they cannot eat. This is unacceptable in a country like ours.
The ADA wants the major parties to commit to a senior benefits program, which would fund basic dental services in aged care facilities, train staff so they can help with dental care, and include dental assessments in the over 75 health check performed by GPs. All up, it would cost about $95 million a year.
Dental care has been the canary in the coal mine of full body health in Australia. There's no doubt. It is drastically underfunded, drastically ignored.
The Grattan Institute's Annika Stobart says while expensive policies are rarely palatable for voters, not funding aged care dental would also come at a cost.
Because the mouth is connected to the body, we see higher risks for diabetes or cardiovascular issues if people don't address their oral health care needs. And then this also puts pressure on the health system.
The Coalition argues dental and oral health is a key part of primary care, and it's extending its agreement with the states to fund public dental for another year. Labor says it's committed to its long-term goal of expanding Medicare to dental health services, but hasn't specified a timeframe.
Back home now, and a fluffy ginger gang of serial killers is terrorising wildlife in the Waitakere Ranges. The feral cats were first spotted in the Whatapu Scientific Reserve in 2016, but seem to have grown in number. Wayne McKenzie has been out trying to trap the cats, and he joins us now. Hi, Wayne. What have these cats been up to?
Hi, Lisa. Well, they've been chewing on the native birds out there in the Whatapu Scientific Reserve.
Yeah, so which birds have they been targeting, and how bad is the damage they're doing?
Yeah, over the sort of the period of lockdown, August last year, there was a big storm and Whatapu was closed off until the end of January, and there was a large colony of terns, white-fronted terns, and possibly as many as 90 birds on the rock that's out there, Te Takatipu Kupe, and certainly there's multiple signs of the cats chewing on these tara, these white-fronted terns. And I was out there just 2 weeks ago, and there's more prints in the sand dunes. I lived out there for 5 years. It's a very remote place, and I've eyeballed these ginger cats myself.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about them, Wayne. Do they look like domestic moggies, or what can you tell us about how they look?
Oh, they're a bit scruffier than that. You know, they really do look a bit feral. Whatapu's, it's 9 kilometres from our nearest neighbour in the north, which is Karikari, and 6 kilometres to the east is Little Huia. So it's a place that it's not residential.
So what does that tell you about how they got out there then?
Possibly they've just come out from Karikari and down the beach. I wouldn't like to think that people have dropped them off at the car park, but then I saw a Facebook comment. A friend of mine from 20 years ago says that they used to be dropped out there in the car park.
Any idea how many there now are, Wayne?
I know at one point one of the feral pig hunters out there, the contractors, I believe he counted as many as 9 up at the tunnel point, which is about halfway between Whatapu and Karikari, a colony of 9 cats, and he may have controlled those. I'm not certain. That was probably 5 or 7 years ago.
Yes, so Wayne, cats can be slippery little buggers. I mean, how hard is it to trap them and get rid of them? Yeah,
they're very wary, and the time I tried to catch them in a live trap, I set sardines out there for 3 months and check it daily. That was after I eyeballed it twice in a fortnight, and it just wasn't interested. But the council, Auckland Regional Parks, and their senior ranger of conservation, Sean Bennett, indicating that they're going to be using some technology, some live catch traps with activation alerts, possibly some other methods like maybe night shooting to remove these. I mean, Whatapu is a scientific reserve. It's a real wildlife sanctuary, and I've seen out there little whimbrels. Now, not a lot of people have even heard of a little whimbrel, but cattle egrets, dab chicks, Australian shovelers, New Zealand dotterels. So that it's only 40 minutes from Auckland. So it's a very important landscape in this region.
Yeah, so these cats are really unwelcome visitors, given the environment you've just described.
Oh, absolutely. In a scientific reserve, there's no place for cats. And I'd add, there's no place for dogs as well. So dogs aren't permitted to anywhere near Whatapu. Much like Tawharanui, the Kiwi sanctuary north of Auckland.
Yeah, really appreciate your time, Wayne. Thanks for joining us. That's Wayne McKenzie there, talking about these cats that are at Whatapu, feral, and doing some damage to the birds there, and they're trying to get rid of them. Let's get to some more of your feedback. A lot of you, commenting on the number of injuries at construction sites. Paul says, I always tell tradie friends to record an ACC claim, even from small injuries, as they never know if it will turn into a long-term injury, and we all know that ACC won't cover it at a later date without the original claim. Scott says the construction sector needs to move more of the workforce into safe, clean, organised work environments and use manufacturing techniques and technology to reduce workforce injuries. Now, on the congestion charge, the suggestion that, at least 2 of the cities are going to get congestion charges, an announcement pending next week. This listener says, I was in the UK when London introduced the congestion charge. Bus fares didn't increase any, I can tell you that. On the subject of Gloriavale, a lot of you getting in touch with on that one. And this is the kids being classified as employees working at Gloriavale. They should be fined out of existence, this listener says.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. An employment court ruling is being described as going to the heart of the Gloriavale Christian community's reliance on child labour for their business success. The court has found 3 former members were employed from the age of 6, and the work they did was strenuous, difficult and sometimes dangerous. Brian Henry represented the trio and told Checkpoint the decision shows how the community's business model operates and where it cuts costs.
So things like tea breaks, 8-hour days, weekends, it's child labour and free labour, and labour that has worked way beyond what any competitor can do.
Brian Henry says as children his clients were harvesting sphagnum moss and looking after beehives. The government has announced a further round of Russian sanctions as it continues to condemn the war in Ukraine. The sanctions target 8 individuals and entities involved in disinformation campaigns and cyber attacks. This includes a spokesperson for the Russian Ministry of Defence and a troll farm. Foreign Affairs Minister Nanaya Mahuta says Vladimir Putin is using the digital space as a weapon. The sanctions ban individuals from coming to New Zealand or undertaking any business here and freezes their assets. Many Auckland residents are worried that a congestion charge would add to the steep cost of living. It's believed the emissions reduction plan will include a congestion charge for motorists passing through Auckland's busiest routes at peak times. But there's concern it unfairly affects people on lower incomes who have no choice but to drive. Auckland resident Jenny Preston says she hails Ubers and doesn't want to pay a congestion surcharge.
Absolutely not worth the petrol prices as well. I don't believe that Auckland City is as busy as it used to be anyway, because people are working all over Auckland. But yeah, I don't think we're ready for that, not right now.
Jenny Preston says such a charge might put people off visiting the city centre. The New Zealand share markets had a 3rd consecutive day of heavy losses, leaving it at a near 2-year low. The benchmark NZX 50 index clawed back some losses, but still closed down 152 points, or 1.3%, to its lowest level since July 2020. The index fell 2% on Monday and has managed only one positive session in the past week. Brokers say the New Zealand market has been powerless in the face of the global tide of volatility caused by rising interest rates, inflation, China's COVID disruptions and the Ukraine war. Influenza cases are rising in the Lower South Island, with more people turning up at emergency departments with the virus. The Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Susan Jack, says over the past few years, flu hasn't been a problem. But she says now that the border has reopened and visitors are arriving, flu strains are circulating. Dr. Jack says anyone who's eligible for a free flu vaccination should get it now to reduce the risk of severe flu symptoms. Significant changes are on the way for Art Deco festivities in Napier after COVID and the lack of international tourists hit the events hard. Last year's festival was cancelled and this year's was hugely scaled back. This has meant the festival has suffered from financial strain. Organisers of the Art Deco Trust will deliver fewer ticketed events for upcoming festivals. Chairperson Barbara Arnott says hospitality and retail organisations will have to organise events themselves, but they'll be promoted by the Trust.
The Art Deco Trust per se will scale back some events, but it will mean that other all our commercial and retail partners will pick up a whole lot of slack.
The Trust's in-house events team has been pared back, with the festival director losing his job. And anti-government violence spread across Sri Lanka late into the night on Monday, with 5 people killed and about 180 injured. It came even as the Prime Minister, Mahinda Rajapaksa, quit following weeks of protest. The BBC's Ambarasan Etirajan reports from Colombo.
Just outside Colombo's airport, men armed with sticks and rods have established roadblocks. Police and other security forces were not to be seen anywhere. Sri Lanka finds itself in an unprecedented upheaval. Mobs are targeting the homes of politicians. Some even attempted to storm the highly protected residence of their Prime Minister, Mahinda Rajapaksa. 5 people died and more than 180 were injured in violent clashes between pro- and anti-government supporters on Monday. A ruling party MP was among those killed. The government has imposed a nationwide curfew until Wednesday morning.
That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Elliot Child samples a new collaboration between Rai Kuda and Taj Mahal. Chris Bumby asks whether the fictional ring world created by sci-fi genius Larry Niven could ever be a real world. And Anne Cohen discusses the philosophy of former Google strategist James William. These days, he's warning people about the dangers of the internet, commanding all our attention. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel. Fine spells and a few showers clearing tonight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers easing tomorrow. Waitomo to Kapiti Coast, also Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Mainly fine, apart from isolated showers until this evening. Wellington and Wairarapa, occasional showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mostly fine. However, there are isolated showers about northern Buller and Nelson and far south of Fiordland. Marlborough and Canterbury, areas of cloud. A few showers today. Cloud is clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. Otago and Southland, areas of cloud and some showers. Fine tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few light showers. It's 6 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Thanks, Evie. No mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's plain ready access to child labour is a significant factor in the commercial success of the Gloriavale Christian community, according to the Chief Employment Court judge. Judge Christina Inglis found that 3 former members of the community were employees working long hours from the age of just 6, carrying out strenuous, difficult and sometimes dangerous duties. That's despite Gloriavale claiming they were doing chores or work required by their parents or part of schooling. The Leavers reported doing 3 a.m. morning milking shifts at the age of 6 or 7 years old. Liz Gregory is the manager of the Gloriavale Leavers Trust that supports people who choose to leave the Christian commune, and she joins me now. Kia ora, Liz. What does this decision mean, do you think?
Oh, this is just an enormous decision. I think it's going to have huge ramifications for Gloriavale, their economic model. The judge stated that their model had been based on use of child labour. And so you're looking at perhaps significant changes, possibly a charities investigation? Should this group be a charity? Are you looking at financial implications if they're not? So, yeah, this is no small case today.
And for all those people who have fought so long for some kind of recognition as to what's going on within this community?
Tears. I've had people just ringing, crying on the phone, saying, wow, someone has finally heard us. We've been heard, we've been understood. You can't underestimate the power that has on a group of people who have been oppressed and now they've found their voice.
Liz, the interesting thing when you read this judgment, and it's a lengthy one, is the level of detail that has been made public about the goings-on there. What value do you think that has?
Oh, incredible. I'm delighted that that level of information has come out to the public sphere, because a lot of things do get suppressed, and it's difficult when you're working with other government agencies to be able to provide them, coherent material. Well, this has come from a judge. This judge understood the control levers at Gloriavale. She's understood power and control mechanisms. So I can see this being useful in various other court cases around Gloriavale, whether it be criminal, perhaps even family court scenarios. This is information which is confirmed and recognised by a court of law in New Zealand. It's quite unbelievable.
So, in terms of what the young men said, one said he was hit with a shovel for not working hard or fast enough, that they were denied food as a way of controlling their behaviour if they were deemed not to be working hard enough. They didn't get meals and they were embarrassed in front of other people. What wider concerns do you have for the kids who were still there?
Significant concerns, and we've been ringing alarm bells for years around this, and today this is important for us. It's almost like a vindication. The Leavers had concerns, reasonable concerns, and they brought their evidence to government agencies who chose not to pursue things for various reasons. So we've got concerns always about their psychological safety, physical safety, just all sorts of safety at Gloriavale. There's no doubt the concerns still exist for us, although there have been changes. They have been under the watchful eye of groups now for a number of years. So they have, there have been some amendments, especially in relation, I think, to physical abuse. And so that is a good thing. But you're talking about decades of people here who can tell stories of harm, physical harm done to them. And it's heart-wrenching. These are just three guys representing a much larger population.
How badly have those people been let down by some government agencies?
It's been shocking. It's probably one of the things that has upset me most. I get very upset about what I hear coming out of Gloriavale, but I have been particularly perturbed and disturbed by government agencies. That's because we have given them credible information, and it just hasn't had the traction. Why should the little people have to go to court in New Zealand to have a government agency do its job properly? I feel particularly passionately that is not how our society should be operating. The law was there, Gloriavale was breaking it, there was evidence. Why did it have to go to court? It didn't need to. People could have done their jobs.
Why do you think that those agencies backed off or didn't take things further?
I think they think it's too hard. It's complex. There aren't enough examples of this kind of thing in New Zealand. I think they're obviously nervous. What if they get it wrong? But all I look at is the people who have been harmed, and I think of the 6 wasted years between the last charities investigation when a lot of this started kicking off. And I just think of the harm that I know that's gone on in that 6 years, and that is something that upsets me.
Liz, the community there is making a lot of commercial products, right? Pet food, bee products, things that are being sold, and the money goes back into the community and to acquire quite significant assets, right? Yes. Given what we now know and the court has said about the labour and how those businesses are being propped up, what do you want to say to people about purchasing those products?
Well, I think that Kiwis often take a stand against companies overseas that they think involve exploitation. I guess it might be time to look in their backyards and see, do we have this happening here in New Zealand right under our noses? It's certainly a question for every person to examine.
Thank you for your time, Liz. That's Liz Gregory, who's the manager of the Gloriavale Leavers Trust. The government is coming under increasing pressure to rein in the supermarket operators, with Consumer NZ launching a public petition. The watchdog wants the government to go further than the Commerce Commission has recommended, and the Minister David Clark isn't ruling that out. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Everyone knows it, but that doesn't make it hurt any less at the supermarket checkout.
Price of groceries is shocking.
Definitely more expensive.
I just can't believe how much everything has gone up. People are only managing to survive, and that's not living.
The latest figures prove the pain. Food prices up 7.6% in March, the biggest annual increase in more than a decade. All eyes on the updated numbers due out later this week.
Last week I bought a cabbage, it cost me $7.
You have to budget every week to what you can afford.
Yes, don't buy the expensive things anymore. Buy just what I can get through with.
We used to get a kilo of cheese, and I remember when it was like $6.99, then it slowly creeped up to the normal was $10. Today I went in there and it's $13.99.
Consumer NZ is now ramping up the pressure through a new petition asking the government to take immediate action to put struggling households first.
New Zealanders are suffering at the checkout, and the supermarket profits are part of why.
The independent watchdog wants the government to regulate the two major retailers, Woolworths and Foodstuffs, forcing them to provide wholesale supply to new competitors. Alternatively, Chief Executive John Duffy suggests the government could set up its own wholesale supplier.
In order to kind of unravel the last 20 years of duopolistic behaviour, we're going to have to make some hard choices.
Consumer NZ's proposals go further than the Commerce Commission recommended in March, back when it highlighted the sector's sky-high profits. The Commission did suggest opening up wholesale supply, but on a voluntary basis. The government signalled it is willing to go further and faster.
This government takes seriously the challenges that consumers are facing, and we are going to act.
The Commerce Minister, David Clark, has tasked his officials with finding a solution. A government-owned wholesaler is highly unlikely, but he says regulation could be on the cards.
We want consumers to be paying a fair amount at the checkout. That's why we launched this study, so that we could have really robust analysis. The Commerce Commission has delivered robust analysis of the problem, and it's just the solutions that we're working through now.
National says it's well past time for action. Christopher Luxon wants the government to just crack on with the Commerce Commission's proposals and to introduce a strong code of conduct with teeth.
Take those recommendations, implement them strongly. If they're not working, we go back to it again and we put tougher recommendations in.
Both the supermarket chains have rejected their making excessive profits, but say they are actively working on the Commission's recommendations. They'll be nervously awaiting the government's final call. It's expected within the next few weeks.
It is 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, some of your thoughts on Gloriavale and the court ruling today that these young men were actually employees of Gloriavale working from the age of 6. Strenuous and sometimes dangerous work, the court found. Brent says, once again, this organisation has had an easy ride from government agencies because it's religious and therefore above reproach in the eyes of some. Time for humanism and human decency in our secular public service, says Brent. And Murray's got in touch to say about time Gloriavale was taken to task. Gloriavale assets are owned by a charitable trust and is listed on the charities register. In light of the evidence from this recent court case, Gloriavale should lose its charity status. Thanks for your feedback. The impact of COVID-19 appears to have hit people's waistlines. Global health authorities are concerned in particular with childhood obesity. They say it was bad before COVID and now the problem's going even worse. The ABC's Emily Burke reports.
Between 1975 and 2016, the number of children living with obesity increased more than tenfold, from 11 million to 124 million. Now there's data showing that the COVID pandemic has led to a steep rise in obesity levels among children and teenagers. Bernadette Moore is Professor of Obesity at Leeds University and has crunched the international data, and her analysis has been published in The Lancet.
Of course, we know that the public health response in many countries was lockdown. So schools were closed, there were restrictions on activities, all of the areas where children might have had physical activity like swimming or after-school clubs, all of that stuff closed. Now, that varied across different countries, but so far, all of the ones that have published data show that childhood obesity has increased.
Some of the most alarming data come from England, where since 2006, a comprehensive measurement program has tracked the height and weight of children when they start preschool and then later when they finish primary school. Approximately 10% of preschoolers were obese from 2006 up until the start of the pandemic. The percentage of final year students living with obesity had steadily climbed from 17% to 21%. But the more recent data from 2020 and 2021 show a sharp increase in obesity prevalence to an overall 14.5% in preschoolers and 25.5% in final year students. It's a similar story in the US, China, Korea and parts of Europe. But the data also demonstrates a disturbing trend. Obesity prevalence was over twice as high for children living in the most deprived neighbourhoods.
Poverty brings with it stressors. Adverse events in childhood alter biological pathways in the brain that can alter eating behaviour. But on top of that, the most deprived neighbourhoods in most countries look different from the most affluent neighbourhoods. So there's often a lack of green space, there's often a lack of safe areas to play, there can be a lack of healthy, affordable food, confluence of fast food restaurants.
So with the lockdowns long gone, in most places, can the childhood obesity rates be reversed?
The history, the last 20 years, doesn't bring optimism. What we should be doing, so we know maternal nutrition is important, we know that breastfeeding and the introduction of complementary foods is important, but the school environment plays a huge role, and physical activity in schools can make a big difference. Restricting advertising to children makes a difference, and now of course we've got the internet and YouTube, and children are just deluged with advertising. So I desperately hope that it's reversible. It may be that children are resilient, that they've survived national disasters and war in previous generations. But childhood obesity has a way of sticking. So we know children who've experienced obesity in childhood, that obesity tracks into early adulthood, and people tend to gain more and more as they get older. So the fact that we know a third of children who are living with obesity have fatty livers, we know that 20% of college-age children have fatty liver disease, we're really looking at a crisis if we don't reverse the obesity pandemic.
The World Health Organization is developing an acceleration action plan to stop obesity, tackle the epidemic in high-burden countries and catalyse global action. That plan will be discussed at the 76th World Health Assembly to be held later this month.
Sri Lanka's Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has resigned amid chaos and upheaval in the capital. There have been protests over soaring prices and power cuts since last month. 5 people have died, including a ruling party MP, and almost 200 people injured in Colombo. The island nation is facing its worst economic crisis since 1948, with less than $79 million in foreign reserves. The BBC's Rajani Vaidyanathan reports.
An island nation sinking fast. An explosion of anger after weeks of anti-government protests. As the two sides came face to face, supporters of the Prime Minister attacked the so far peaceful demonstrators who were calling for the government to go. They accused the police of failing them.
As you can see, scenes are extremely tense here. This is outside the Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa's house.
Violence once plagued this nation during decades of civil war. Now, an economic emergency has left millions struggling to survive.
It shouldn't be happening in this country. They want bloodshed again in this country. No gas, no fuel, and various essential medications. And people are suffering, and the people are living with 1 meal per day. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? I'm so sorry to say this.
A cost of living crisis after a pandemic has brought thousands to the streets. They blame the government for reckless borrowing, ill-timed tax cuts and a failed experiment in organic farming, which has driven food shortages. Political heavyweights in Sri Lanka Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and his brother, the President Gotabaya, have ruled Sri Lanka on and off for decades. Now, the man once known as the country's lion has quit. Addressing his faithful one last time, Mahinda Rajapaksa, who's also served as both President and Finance Minister, is stepping aside to make way for an all-party government.
These protesters have just found out that Sri Lanka's Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has resigned. It is a big moment for them. They have been calling for the Prime Minister and the President who remains in power to quit over this economic crisis.
Tonight, the home of a government MP was set alight by protesters. Until President Gotabaya Rajapaksa resigns, he and his party will continue to feel the heat.
During a speech on Victory Day commemorating Russia's victory over Nazi Germany in 1945, President Vladimir Putin says the invasion was a preventative strike and necessary to protect Russia. But while Mr Putin appears to have majority support at home for his war, the backing shrinks among younger generations. The ABC's Isabella Higgins reports.
From his bedroom in Moscow, 19-year-old Nikita can hear Russia's annual Victory Day parade. He doesn't want us to use his last name to protect his identity. The war in Ukraine has stirred up complicated feelings the university student has towards his homeland.
You have to support your country, even if your government and your country is wrong, and even if it's putting you in a conflict that you don't want to be in, you still have to support them.
At the Victory Day parade, Russia's President Vladimir Putin blamed the West for provoking the war and called on his citizens to defend their country. It seems many Russians are listening to his message, including Nikita.
I can see that to me, it's not a war between Russia and the Ukraine. It's a war between Russia and the West, NATO, and the Ukraine is just a territory that happens to be between those regions.
It's difficult to get accurate data on just how many in the country support this war, but polling from the independent Levada Centre suggests about 81% of Russians support the military operation. But among young voters, those figures dropped to 71%. Alexei Levinson is the head of research for the organisation. He says the war greatly impacts the lives of young people.
They risk to be conscripted and sent to the warfare. This is a real danger for them, and they do understand it.
He warns as casualties mount on the battlefields, Putin could lose support of young people.
Time will work not for them, but against them. And within several months, the support of this operation may fall down.
24-year-old Sergei Faldin and his wife Juliet are some young Russians frustrated with their nation's leadership. They decided to leave the country and are now living in London.
I think that what Putin did is he obliterated and really erase all the future that could be possible for Russia.
Do you see a future for yourself?
Like among our generation, like there's this big divide, like that there are people who stay and fight and people who leave to live their lives.
Juliet finds the military action in Ukraine impossible to reconcile.
Russians disbelief in it, and it's just horrifying. It's like a country of zombies.
For those who fear an uncertain future, they've decided to flee their country instead.
And finally tonight to an unusual birthday celebration. After his last tour had to be cancelled because of the pandemic, British singer Paul Heaton invited fans around the country to celebrate him turning 60. The former House Martins and Beautiful South frontman put £1,000 behind the bar at 60 pubs across the UK and Ireland. The BBC's Adam Powell visited one of those taking part.
One of Britain's best-loved songwriters is buying his fans a pint. Paul Heaton, the former House Martin and Beautiful South frontman, has put money behind the bar at 60 pubs across the UK and Ireland to celebrate his 60th birthday, including at Carlisle's Sportsman Inn.
Hi, I'm Mandy Pickin. I'm the licensee of the Sportsman Inn. We're very honoured
I've got a lot of response on social media, so we're hoping for a fantastic day for it.
What a good place to be. Don't believe
Among those raising a glass were Melanie and Adi. Adi's a kitchen fitter who took the day off to celebrate Paul Heaton's birthday, which probably makes him a Paul Heaton superfan.
You're both too young to remember the House Martins, aren't you?
If only.
So, Adi, you've taken the day off specially, yeah?
Yep.
That's commitment.
Yeah.
So, how good was that first pint then?
£60,000 worth of pints. That's one hell of a lot of beer. Who can imagine it? Some of your feedback before we head off. This is on the T3 cameras on Oniwa Road. They've been smashed up on the North Shore. This listener says the cameras on Oniwa Road stop single occupancy cars cheating the old system of 2 handheld cameras. They improve the effectiveness of the lane and therefore help reduce climate change. We need more of them, not fewer. John Gillen isn't getting my vote next election. James says the cameras are money machines. Just look at the take on bus lanes. And another listener says, I've lived near Oniwa Road for 50 years. There have been people actively monitoring and fining the traffic for at least 35 years, Monday to Friday, and now cameras. Such a huge expense in slowing down anyone not in a bus. This system creates the queues and creates the problems. It's time AT woke up and realised people need cars. I tell you what, there's no grey in this feedback. You're either for it or terribly against it. Another person says the only people complaining about the enforcement cameras on Oniwa Road are those who drive down T3 lanes when there are no camera operators. Everyone else who respects the rules or rides the bus thinks they're great. And Rosie in Christchurch says she'd like some of the excess cameras sent down to her in Christchurch for the Summit Road. That is about all we've got time for. The late news team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. Don't forget, if you missed anything on Checkpoint, you can find us on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts, and you can fill your boots. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up is live in Wanaka, where NASA's balloon program is ready to launch in the morning with a little stuffed kiwi as a passenger. Whoa, brave stuffed kiwi. Kei te hoki mai anō a pōpō whānau pō Mārie. Catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. An employment court judgment has found that the work carried out by former Gloriavale members as children were not just chores. 8 more Russian individuals and entities face sanctions from the New Zealand government.